I said to Michael Tamlin that I was so glad there was a lunch between his presentation and this one. Simple presentation today. Morgan was really helpful in setting up the agenda. We're going to talk about what is XML. That's going to be mercifully short. I think 3 slides. Why is it useful for publishers? Also reasonably mercifully short. How is XML used by publishers? Part of the project that we were involved in involved a survey co-sponsored with BISG, in which we got a lot of data about different types and different sizes of publishers, their current uses of XML and their current non-uses of XML. A lot of that data didn't make it into the forum in January when we hosted it, but we picked it apart a little bit more for this conference, so you're going to see some data that's unique to that. And to that end, I guess Tim and Noah perhaps are handing out copies of both detailed survey data as well as a 4-page summary, executive summary of the project. Those materials, if you either don't get a piece or you just are at an overload for how much paper you want to carry, are also already available on the BNC website. Also, if you want to refer them to anyone, you can get them there. We're going to talk about emerging best practices, and then finally, how do you get started if you're interested in this topic area. Here's the nutshell on it. Where do I want you to end up? If you're looking to reduce your direct or indirect costs, if you're looking to improve content storage and retrieval, and those are 2 areas in which a number of publishers we surveyed said they had significant issues. If you're looking to make greater use of other formats, things like large print, POD, or ebook, or if you're looking to figure out a way to be ready for a more robust use of content, selling by chapter, etc., then XML can help. I am not in the camp, and I don't think any of my colleagues were as well, that XML will solve everything. It doesn't do laundry. It's not the perfect solution. And it's a fairly large footprint. Michael Timms did an excellent job of saying, essentially, just force-feeding it into an existing operation is not the right way to go. However, there are a lot of good uses, and I hope to be able to walk you through them today. So what is it? Extensible markup language, specifically something that uses elements, already the building blocks of content, to define the structure of a document. You can define or adapt elements to fit your own particular niche or taxonomy. It's adaptable for your own use. And it allows you to customize the presentation of content across multiple uses. This tagging or structure allows you to separate content from design. Traditionally, as you see at the top, in a print-centric approach, content, structure, and design are all tied together. With XML, content and structure are separate, and then design is applied after the fact, generally through style sheets. This gives you greater flexibility. If you can identify the structural components that you want to use and reuse over multiple documents or multiple uses, then you can create a book, a PDF, an ebook, a large print format, and others using style sheets and transforms. And we'll come back to that toward the end of the presentation. So some of the things that I think motivate when you're thinking about why consider XML, the environment is changing. You've heard a lot about that already this morning. And there is a call for multiple uses and reuses. It varies by the segments that you're in, the niche, the type of publisher that you are, but there are a variety of different things that you have to do in the future. There's also a call for some sort of return on investment. Sometimes can be a fairly significant investment in XML, but any process change is going to take time and energy, even if it's not systems intensive. One of the things that we think is really important is to think about XML in terms of a migration from process complexity to content agility. Currently, book publishing in general is a write once, read once kind of approach, and it varies a lot by different types of publishers, but particularly in trade, you're working for a single format. And there are lots of different ways to go about doing that. XML requires you to narrow the range of ways in which you might create content, with the advantage that you will write once, read many. Now, the transition challenge is simple. It's an investment. It requires advanced planning. It also requires you to change process, technology, and probably some organizational structures and roles in a geared fashion, some interrelated planning. You've got to learn and apply new tools in new ways. And you don't typically do that overnight. And you can somewhat constrain your design flexibility. The tools that are currently used for output from XML right now aren't going to give you the same flexibility that you have within design. But they're pretty good, but you have to plan for it. So to plan, you have to make a business case. Now, when we wrote the research paper, one of the sections is specifically dedicated to how do you get to that business case. And it's built upon 5 things. There's a strategy of the organization that you work in, the culture, what your future uses are, the markets that you serve, and ultimately the return on investment excuse me, that you think is important. ROI can be broken down into 3 different segments. There's obviously cost management. That's the one that typically gets the most time and attention these days. The second is revenue growth, and the third is appropriate use of XML. And by appropriate, we mean, in effect, it's not the same implementation for everybody, and it depends a lot upon your use. We'll come back to that in a few slides. Starting with cost management, I mentioned before, direct and indirect costs. You can save money in direct costs by things like composition, how much it takes, how much money you're spending on creating a finished book, handling the conversion, the transform costs from one format to another, as well as things related to collateral. Indirect costs involve things like rework. If you planned and created a more simple or more straightforward content generation process, you're going to reduce your rework. That's not strictly an XML benefit. You could do that work without XML and save money. It's one of the byproducts of the effort. And the second is staff time, particularly if you've made an effort to do things like link IP with rights. There's also an opportunity to grow revenue, and that's a harder and generally a longer-term process. Cost management you can identify and work in a given time period, but for revenue growth you have to start by thinking of your intellectual property, not as a book, but as something at the center of a variety of different formats, a printed book, large print format, something going to the web, used for marketing materials and the like. You also have to think about either current or future uses, things like content aggregation, the opportunity to do custom publishing, digital marketing that you may not be doing or you may be doing with a lot of extra work as downstream opportunities. The final piece of it is actually is what we describe as appropriate use of XML. And when we started to think about this in our project, we said, what makes sense to use, how do you want to most effectively use XML? And there are 2 basic dimensions that we came to. The first on the left is how many chunks, how for lack of, this is a disruption of the English language, but how chunkable is your content? By this we mean, if you're a long-form novel, it's obviously you're not going to break it up into chapters except for perhaps marketing purposes. But if you were a travel guide, as was used as an example earlier today, it's very conceivable that you would sell Paris or you would sell France as a separate component. That makes the content more chunkable. The second is how likely is it that you're going to use it again and again, or to use it in different formats. And one thing we saw, and you see this in the upper right quadrant, a variety of different types of books. And we're not claiming these are the only candidates that should be in this quadrant or that every publisher would put them there. But things like Bibles or cookbooks, business and education materials, travel and tourism are natural candidates for a significant or a more significant investment in XML. In the lower left, things like novels or scholarly monographs up to fictional series, those might be less likely to benefit from a significant investment in XML, but you will invest, particularly if you look at the overall range of benefits. You can gain benefits by investing in XML to the extent that you're going to actually be able to use it for either process efficiencies or downstream reformatting in a more cost-effective manner. I mentioned a moment ago that we'd done a survey with BISG, and also that we'd taken apart the data to more specifically address both smaller and different types of publishers, something that we hadn't done before. And this is what we found. Generally, there were slight differences between large and small publishers. There's a notion that larger publishers are doing XML or are more familiar with XML than smaller ones. We didn't see that in the data, and I'll show you that in a moment. The second is that education and scholarly, not surprisingly, lead in their implementation. When we asked publishers across a range of different types and sizes, do you see greater use or greater desire for chunking content or for more formats and repurposing? Uniformly, they all said yes. I mean, we're talking like in the range of 90%. Expanded editions, except for education, not really. That was not something that's on the radar. Although, if you listen to the ebook discussions that have already occurred and are going to occur today after this one, I think that it's at least potentially a downstream opportunity. Typically, DocBook and EPUB, although those are the most common formats that are discussed, they're relatively rare. Most people that have done this were doing it with some sort of proprietary infrastructure in DTD. And the prevalent tool set was not sure, which suggests that there's either a lack of awareness or a sense that I got handed this, I'm working with it, I have no idea what it is. Now, we looked at a fairly diverse audience. You can see on the left side the type of publisher, a little bit trade-weighted, but still a pretty good representation from scholarly, professional, and education. And for employees, it was generally somewhat larger, but not vastly so, and a little bit less than even break between medium-sized and smaller publishers. We saw variety in sizes across all different types of publishers. If you look at scholarly, professional, and to a certain extent trade, they're all broken down somewhat similar to the summary, the total that I gave you in the previous slide. Education tended to be weighted higher, and that's the nature of the education publishers in general. We also heard a lot from management and to a certain extent production that I think, particularly with production, as you'll see in a moment, that's where XML is most commonly being used right now, production distribution. We asked about digital workflow. How important was it to you? And when we broke it down by size, as you'll see here, there's very little difference between smaller, larger, and medium in terms of trying to understand how important it is versus we think it's very important. They're both in the range of 40%. A second thing is digital workflow by type. Interesting here, if you look at the gap, the thing that's circled here, the folks who are trying to understand XML, no one in education is trying to understand XML. They completely get it, and it's very important to what they do. And the question you have to ask yourself, if you are an education publisher and you don't use XML, that would be a warning sign. If you're not an education publisher, you might ask yourself, is this a canary in a coal mine? Is this telling us something that, down the road we're going to have to deal with? And we think the answer is yes, but it's certainly a question you want to come to a clear answer on your own. Separately, and this is an interesting thing, the XML fit with content management systems and DAM. This is one of the very few outliers, and you'll see it on the numbers sheet that went around. This is one of the very few outliers between smaller and larger. For some reason, small publishers came back and said they saw no relationship. This is about a little bit less than 40%. No relationship between XML and content management systems or DAM. I want to find those guys and shake them because there's clearly a relationship between the tools that you use to create content and the technology that you have for storing and manipulating it. It may just be an aberrant, or we asked the question in a way that wasn't completely understood, but it really stuck out when we went through the data. In terms of current uses of XML, production and distribution predominate. It varies a little bit by type of publisher, but this is really where the bulk of the work is done. There is some upstream work going on, particularly in education for authoring and archiving, but this is where most of the focus and time and attention is. In terms of content reuse, generally, particularly if you look at this for trade, ignoring chunking, this is also true professional, is fairly common. Editing focused solely on print. Again, here you look at education, and ignoring downstream use when acquiring content. In both cases, education, the answer truly was 0. And of the dozens of responses we received from the education set, no one answered that they ignored that. And we again feel that that's a little bit of a signal for what's coming. In terms of upside for agile content, we asked people, if you could, for example, find a way to fix your print-to-web processes, or if you could publish in more ebook formats, or if you wanted to, and cost-effectively could deliver more ebook formats, would you? And just looking at the very bottom, the doing more book formats, I mean, you're talking literally over 90% of the respondents across almost all categories said, yeah, we really do. If we could figure out a way to do this, this would be worth money to us. And the same thing's true of the fixing print-to-web processes. You've got something in the range, with the exception of professional, something in the range of 70 to 80% of the publishers responding to the survey saying our processes are either somewhat problematic and need to be fixed or are real sources of pain for us. So clearly, whether you're picking XML or just an overall process improvement, this is an opportunity both to save money and to improve your effectiveness as a publishing organization. There's a range of views on repurposing. Virtually no one, no one at all in education or professional said that it was not for us. And no one in education said we should, but we don't. I mean, those are pretty stark numbers. Most people, and particularly in education, said for certain books or types we do it, and in a number of cases, particularly again for education, it's standard practice. This is an instance of folks who've been under a lot of pressure. They are larger publishers on average, but they've been under a lot of pressure, and they've clearly responded by figuring out ways to reuse content and to use content efficiently for the markets that they serve. It's scary, especially if you do the work that I do, that only, depending on, it was about 25% of the total audience, and it breaks down differently across different types of publishers, said that storage, retrieval, and versioning was a science. A fairly significant share said that they either had problems or it was a major headache. And if you think that these kinds of things are going to become in greater demand in the future and you're going to have to support more formats, the problems only grow exponentially. Expanded edition activity, as I said, was not a big thing except in education. And ultimately, what we wanted you to take away from this is that everyone that we talked to, everyone that we surveyed seemed to see a value in more formats, but there were multiple formats were far from under control. And that's a significant issue, especially when you're thinking about a process change and use of new technology. Storage and retrieval is certainly not a science. There's a lot of work that is yet to be done in that regard. And smaller publishers, for some reason, are more likely to see XML as unrelated to CMS and digital asset management, which is problematic because you really have to think about these as part of a whole. We put together a summary of best practices for migrating to XML. These are things, we broke them down here by step in the value chain. So for example, in acquisition, use of author guidelines, Word, which is a fairly common tool in editing, in both in authoring and editing. Using XML functionality. It's not the best tool from our perspective. There are better ones, but to borrow from Michael Temlin, some of them will kill you. I mean, they require significant shifts in how you think about how you do authoring and how you do editing. In terms of contracts and agreements, it's relatively rare in the survey data and the interviews that we did that rights data is being integrated with IP. Clearly, XML gives you that opportunity, but that's a planning function that you also have to go through. In terms of editorial, some of the things that are really important, confirming additional downstream uses. Don't start by just creating XML. Figure out what you want to do with it and create the flexibility and invest appropriately for it. If you're a publisher that's in that lower left quadrant, publishing a variety of different types of books, it's not sensible to overinvest in multiple uses. I should say, because there's a lot of data on this, and I'm going to focus on two things, style sheets and transforms. These both the handouts as well as this presentation are either, if they're not on it already, are going to be on the BNC website and freely available. So don't feel like you have to scribble everything down. There are two things that were really clear in the survey data that we did. One was that the use of applying style sheets was critically important in the production or production editorial function. And the second was the ability to manage and apply transforms was critical to the overall efficiency of being able to support multiple formats. And we want to talk a little bit more about that. Now, when I was going through the diagram and said XML IP as the center, I was, if you're familiar with XML, as some people in the room are, a little bit fast and loose. It's not so simple that you just create an XML file and then pop, you get large print, and pop, you get print on demand. Well, it's true, you can get EPUB directly from it, but that's a well-designed specification. Fundamentally, what you have to do are two things. One is generally go through a transform, a style sheet transform, the XSLT. And then the second is, for certain formats, you have to create a XSLFO formatting objects, rendering a file so that it can be printed. The key thing here is that you want to start with one file to be able to drive all of those and then make the changes in the one file. The other thing you want to think about is that These style sheets, the ones that are circled in red in this first one, are of a type. You don't have to create 4 style sheets, or you don't have to create 4 vastly different style sheets. They can generally be either cloned or used with relatively small adaptations to drive several different working files. And the second thing is that the formatting objects is similar. You don't have to create something that is only for PDF print and only for print on demand. You can, with some planning, you can either use the same or a similar file to transform them. That's actually the power of it, and the reason is in this slide here. Style sheets help you lower your per page costs. This is actually data taken from Cengage Learning, which obviously as an education publisher has a very strong interest in driving down the cost of creating new content. And one of the things that they did was analyze how much it costs to create using traditional processes, generally in the range of $12 to $14, versus a fully automated XML solution where they think it could be in the range of $3 to $5 a printed page. Obviously for lots of volume, and if you're creating a number of pages across a variety of different formats, a significant upside opportunity. The key thing though is that if you were to create either a transform or a style sheet for every one of these different uses, it's going to cost you money. Generally the investments can be, and they're shown in Cengage's case on the upper right side. You know, a simple style sheet or a simple transform might cost you $500. A very complex one, which would generally involve a lot of design and specific controls on what the output looks like, could be much more. It could be $5,000 or $10,000. So you don't want to just do it for one book. At that point, you're drowning any of the savings that you could have. You want to amortize those over a lot of different books and a lot of different uses. And fundamentally, what that suggests is that the payoff is volume related. This is Cengage's experience. And you have to look at it, you want to do the same analysis and then figure out where the break even is for you. If you produce, say, 20 books in a year and you want to create multiple formats, you're more than likely going to start with the, as I'll show you in a moment, with the formats that you want to support. If you want to make sure that you can deliver an EPUB ebook format, then you start with that and you back up and say, okay, if these are the if we want to be able to do a traditional print, large print, ultimately print on demand, and EPUB, what's the common denominator and how many different transforms do we need to create to do that? And then you essentially, that determines the degree to which you customize your processes to fit the tools. If you're a larger publisher, you can develop tools that make sense for you. We think that's one of the reasons why most of the tools that are currently in use are proprietary. They're not EPUB or DocBook, because folks that have done it generally to this point have been somewhat larger, and the ones that have been somewhat larger could afford to do it over large volumes. But if you're a smaller, medium-sized publisher and you want to support multiple formats, you really have to think about conforming yourself to the downstream use, which means getting familiar with EPUB, getting familiar with print-on-demand specifications, and then essentially building your processes around those. I should ask, am I? Good, thanks. So I wanted to finish up with, effectively, how do you get started with XML? Now, the handout that you have actually gives some of the, in some detail, the third page of this gives detail on each of these 3 pages. We actually came up with, through our survey, a dozen different things that we thought were important. These are typically based upon the experience of publishers that had done the work, learned either the easy way or the hard way what worked, and said if we had to do this again, this is what we would stay with. But in terms of beginning with the end, the 3 core messages obviously are beginning with the end in mind, recognizing that this is a sustained change, and the third is that it's not just about XML, and it's probably the most important message that you want to take away today. But to start with beginning with the end in mind, end user requirements are critically important. I mean, you have to really be thinking about what reader applications do you want to support, how detailed, how many different formats do you want to be involved with. You want to look at both the current operational benefits, typically cost savings, as well as future strategic benefits, which is typically revenue growth, or more likely revenue growth. On the implementation side, you want to rank your benefits. Some things are going to get bogged down, stuff won't always go as you expect. If you don't have a clear game plan, but these are the things that are mission critical, these are the things we'd like to have, then you're going to feel like everything has equal weight, and that's not where you want to be. You want to foster and communicate objective measurements. I showed you a moment ago the Cengage component of, we're trying to drive down the cost per page for output. That may not be the one that you pick, but those are measurable things that you can get your arms around and that people can see progress over time. And then finally, you want to look at the value of new and downstream uses. If there's one thing that was really clear in the content of this morning's presentations, is there's a lot of opportunity for downstream use. If you're just simply trying to figure out how to make a print book efficient, I wouldn't recommend XML. If you're trying to figure out a way to cost-effectively support multiple uses, then XML at least provides a pathway to a solution. In terms of sustained change, look across processes that cut across functions and handoffs. Michael Tamlin did a great job of talking about the nature of the silos within book publishing. Book publishing is hardly the only business, and certainly publishing in general is not the only industry that is siloed. But in this case, when you're looking at content, you really have to optimize across multiple functions. This isn't an editorial challenge or a production challenge or a distribution challenge. It's a publishing challenge. And that's why starting with the reader is important. Senior level support, very clearly heard throughout all the interviews that we conducted in the survey as well. If you don't have senior level support for this, it's going to take time. People with a vision need to be able to lead it. If you don't have that, it's going to be particularly hard to keep the momentum going when things either bog down or when something takes more than a financial accounting period to actually take effect. On the implementation side, operating level buy-in is also important. People have to understand why they're doing it. If you're asking people to use new tools and it shifts the burden from, say, production upstream to editing, you have to be able to give a reason why and share in some of the benefits. And also, in the second and the fourth on the slide overall, early wins help ideally spread across multiple functions. But realistically, some things are going to shift and some people aren't going to like it. You have to be upfront about that and be able to explain why it's important for the value for the work that you do, that work be done differently. And the last piece that several people said is don't try to go big bang. I'm quoting Ken Brooks from Cengage, but big bangs make big holes. Prototype, small, test drive stuff. Michael's call for beta is a really useful tool. If you can figure out a way to do something in a single function that at least shows the value of it, or across a specific imprint, rather than trying to go across an entire enterprise, sometimes you can avoid a lot of trouble. And the final piece is that it's not just about XML. You don't have to start right at the end. I mean, you can pick different spots, especially if you're trying to prototype. But the key thing is that you're trying to figure out a way to link knowledge about the content with the way that it's going to be consumed. And that's ultimately an editorial function, guided by marketing, bringing information in as well. And that's not purely a technology or a process or a workflow issue. That's really about what business are you in, what are you trying to achieve as you go forward. Now, I wanted to touch upon some specific, sorry for the phrase, but use cases. One is, if you're looking to streamline ebook production, really think, as you heard me say a few minutes ago, about standard formats. Particularly EPUB. They exist, and you can map to them. You don't have to create your own universe. Work with what already exists. If you're going to support more than EPUB, buy or create transforms that can be used across multiple titles. Don't create a transform that works only for a very small selection of books, or worse yet, just one title. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, BookNet Canada is sponsoring something with Laura Dawson on EPUB later this month. And she's a colleague and also worked on this project, and she'll be talking about it specifically. In terms of producing more formats, start with the formats first. I mean, you want a larger list better than smaller, but at least figure out what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And then either buy or develop the transforms and formatting tools that can be easily shared and adopted. And then a huge call to simplify. I know everybody has their own real reasons why this has to be done the way it is, but try really hard to challenge those. Make it fit for the tools that are available or the most cost-effective tools that you can develop. And then finally, in terms of if you're looking to improve internal processes, catalog your pain points. You know, if it's real world things that people are struggling with, then they're going to respond to them in a meaningful way. If it's just goals that are established at a corporate level, that's not going to really be helpful in motivating change. Be clear where XML helps. In a 40-minute session, I can't go through the level of detail where it could have been done some other way, but fundamentally, you usually have a choice. And XML isn't going to solve every problem, but process change might. And it could, if you can do process change without incurring the pain or the additional expense of XML, go ahead and do it, but do make the change. And then look at focus projects, as I've talked about. And then finally, this is in terms of growing content breadth. If you're looking to repurpose content, start with the end, figure out the likely uses, tie it back to the pain points, and then buy or share the tools that can make the transforms cost effective. And similarly with both trunks and expanded editions, you have to begin with the end in mind. You don't know every use that you have, and you'll probably start wider than narrow, but you don't want to just create an XML workflow that can do anything. It's way too much money, it's way too much time. You want to pick specific things that you can see the benefits, and you can measure progress against getting those benefits. That is available probably for some very cost-effective amount that Andrew Savickas can tell you later, for sale on the O'Reilly site. But you have the summary here, and you can judge for it. ASG and IDPF are really useful resources, and you should rely upon them. They're always happy to help. They're interested in growing the capacity of the book business, and I'm always happy to answer questions, including right now. Thanks. Questions? We'll start here and then in the back.
Early on, you made a reference to culture. I don't know if you're able to zip back to that slide. I'm trying to remember the context, but
It was in context of the business case.
right. So could you expand on the idea of culture?
Sure. I mean, we looked at it. The question is, in terms of building a business case and an overall plan for change, 5 different elements, including strategy, culture, the markets that you serve, and ultimately driving to ROI. The cultural piece is not. Some organizations are not particularly prone to change. They're very happy with where they are, or they're siloed, or they're very successful in the markets that they're in. And trying to implement change, particularly ones that fundamentally are cross-functional in nature, in those organizations has to be taken into account first. To just sort of say, all right, we're going to adopt a new workflow, put it in place, and gain these benefits without taking into specific account the impact that any process or workflow change is going to have on the organizational ability to get its core work done, is a mistake. And it's played out in greater detail in the paper, but it's fundamentally that. So, and in the back.
Some of the publishers in Ontario are looking at creating XML or backlinks. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as an approach to getting into XML.
Okay, so the question is a group of publishers looking at the utility of XML for backlist. Can you tell me a little bit about the nature of the backlist, or is it fairly widely varied?
It's pretty widely
varied. We looked at it in a couple different ways in the study. One was, how deeply do you want to digitize your backlist? And then the second was, where are the efficiencies most available? Some of the publishers we talked to were very interested in just making it seamless, exploring and creating widely available content, because they could see either chunks or opportunities to reuse or repackage content in their backlist that they couldn't get to. And the business case was kind of built around that. That's less common than, for example, just trying to make current backlist, for example, migrating to print on demand as a tool. And if you're going to do that, then what you probably want to do is a minimum level of investment in XML, simply to just do formatting, tagging at a structural level, and then delivering an output for print on demand or ebook or other formats. But for the latter, it's a fairly involved project because you want to identify the titles that actually are chunkable or reusable or whose content has promise. And then to go through, and you have to tag them in ways that are far more detailed than simply structure at a chapter and formatting level. And so because it's widely based, I would say that if you want to look separated into those two things, sometimes obviously if you're going to do a fairly detailed review of chunkable content and then go print on demand, you need both. But fundamentally, it was two different markets. So, other questions? I'm told I have no more time for questions, but I am here the whole day, and at the end there's a reception, and I always go to receptions. Thanks.